Hello, bonjour, bienvenue. My name is Natalie Bull, Executive Director of the National Trust for Canada. I'm so pleased to be here in northwestern New Brunswick on the traditional unceded territory of the Wolastoqiyik people. And I'm excited to be launching Canada Historic Places Days 2021 with a tour of the Tomlinson Lake Hike to Freedom. At the Trust, we know that historic places are gateways to important conversations and stories about the past and the future of our country and our people. And the Tomlinson Lake Hike to Freedom is definitely one of those significant places. It tells an amazing story about the escape of Black families from slavery in the U.S., arriving via the Underground Railroad here, incredibly, in northwestern New Brunswick. Join me for this tour over the next 45 minutes, where we'll hear conversations with Joe G., Graham Nickerson, Jesus Purley. We'll meet a band of Civil War reenactors and hear about the history of this incredible place. Thank you and enjoy.
So this here's a part of the trail of the Tomlinson Lake Hike to Freedom Trail. And where we're at right now is we're in northwestern New Brunswick, in Carlingford, New Brunswick. We're quite close to the U.S. border. If I walked that way, I would be in the state of Maine in like 10-15 minutes. So we're quite close. So there's a brook that we're following, that this trail follows. It's Tomlinson Lake Brook that goes into Fort Fairfield, Maine. That comes from Tomlinson Lake. So we're basically taking the same route that a lot of these Black families took once they arrived in Fort Fairfield. They made their way to Tomlinson Lake. They followed the brook, they followed the moose trail. So basically that's what this trail is doing. So if we come this way, over here we have one of our first storyboards. And this storyboard here just basically explains the role of the Underground Railroad, which was just a network of secret routes that led many fugitive slaves, or the Black families, to their freedom here in Canada during the 1800s. So a lot of people have this common misconception that there was always freedom in Canada, and that's false. So we had slavery here in Canada right up until 1833. First of all, the slave trade was abolished in 1793, but that didn't end slavery. That just meant that you could no longer buy, sell, or trade another person for means of slavery. And it wasn't until 1833 that we had the British Slavery Act that abolished slavery altogether. So that meant that you could no longer own a person for the purposes of enslavement. So we had slavery here in Canada, and it wasn't abolished. It was only abolished about 30 years before emancipation in the United States. So that's definitely not something that deserves a pat on the back. But this is important though to understand the role of the Underground Railroad, because once slavery was abolished in Canada, that word spread, and there were many states that had abolished slavery too. So this network of secret routes and safe houses and conductors that worked all up through the United States. So there were a lot of Black families that were seeking refuge in places like New York and Pennsylvania and Vermont and a lot of those states that had abolished slavery, that also made it illegal for bounty hunters to come to those states to capture those people who were seeking refuge. So I think it explains here on another storyboard why they ended up coming to Canada. And so we'll just keep on walking here.
Canada was Canada was called the Promised Land,
the
or
Promised
Heaven.
Land, yeah. But that was only for about 30 years
Yes.
that it was known as that. So here we have Fringe Church, which was the Quaker Church I think it's like 5 miles from here west. This was the last stop in the state of Maine on the Underground Railroad before Black families came to Tomlinson Lake. And it was built in 1860 by the Quakers that came there. The first Quaker in Fort Fairfield was Joseph Wingate Haynes, and he arrived in 1844 with his wife Mary in Maple Grove. and they were abolitionists. So they were conductors of the
Right.
Underground Railroad, and they helped black families come to Aroostook County, and they used their homes or their barns to hide those black families until this church was built. Once this church was built, they had a little secret hideaway inside the church that they used to hide the black families. So they would hide those families inside the church underneath the stage, and once it was safe, they would let them out, and they would tell them, head east, follow the moose trails, follow the brook until you get to Tomlinson Lake. And because back in that day, back in that time, there was nothing along the border to indicate, to differentiate the U.S. and Canada. It was just all forest. So they used Tomlinson Lake as a landmark. So they said, if you follow the brook and follow the moose trails, when you get to Tomlinson Lake, you will know that you're in Canada. Because this here's, I believe, just right after the Aroostook War, a few years after the Aroostook War. And so there hadn't been anything built yet to indicate where that border was. So at Tomlinson Lake, we had a family known as the Tomlinsons, and oral history dictates that family worked with the Quakers, and this family, the Tomlinsons, greeted the black families once they arrived here to New Brunswick, which is an important part of that oral history, because there wasn't a whole lot of people that was very welcoming of the black families that were
Right.
coming here, because they were refugees is what they were. And not a lot of people here in New Brunswick thought very highly of refugees, especially ones that were coming into the province illegally. So Sergeant William Tomlinson, a little bit about him. He was with the Royal West India Rangers, and he fought in Trinidad. They were disbanded in 1819 in St. John, New Brunswick. And he was given the option of either 10 pounds or the equivalent of land and farming utensils. So he charged, he took the land and the farming equipment, and he came up the St. John River. I think they stayed the winter at Fort Presqu'île, just a couple miles below Florenceville. That's where they stayed the winter. And then in the spring of 1820, they finished coming up the St. John River, and they made their home around Tomlinson Lake. And then after the Quakers came to Fort Fairfield, they must, I can imagine in my mind them two meeting and saying, hey, look, let's, we're helping these families come to New Brunswick to escape the U.S. Do you want to help us? Inside the Tomlinson's home, there was an old wood cook stove, and that's probably the only thing left that, of any type of artifact that exists today, that it can be associated with those black families. Because I like to think, I could be wrong, but I like to think that when the families came to Tomlinson Lake, they allowed them into their home for something like some warm broth and maybe some bread, and I can imagine them sitting around this here step stove, getting warm and just doing what people do when they're tired. And the Tomlinsons helped the families find their way to the St. John River, where they would follow the river, or they would catch a boat ride, and they would head down the St. John River, where there were already black settlements established here in New Brunswick.
That would be Black Loyalist.
Pardon me?
Black Loyalist settlers?
Yeah, so that would have been established
Right.
previously by the Black Loyalists of 1783 or the Black Refugees of 1812. So there's another important character in the story. His name is James Fitzerbert. He was born in Andover, New Brunswick, and during the Aroostook War, which was a dispute over the border between New Brunswick and Maine, he built a blacksmith shop just about a kilometer below the border into Fort Fairfield, and he built a blacksmith shop and a tavern that he used to hide British soldiers at the time. So he had a secret room behind a rollaway wall and a woodshed. after the war, he repurposed that room to hide black families, and he helped those black families escape the state of Maine by taking them up the Sam Everett Road until he got to the Tomlinson Lake Brook, where that brook crossed the road, and he would tell them to follow the brook, and you'll find your way to Tomlinson Lake, to where the Tomlinsons are.
How many families do you think made their way through this route?
There is no recorded number. This was illegal activity. So when you're doing something that's illegal, you don't record it, you don't take photographs, and you don't talk about
Right.
it. So what we know right now is that it did happen based on some evidence that has been found, and through oral history handed down by the Quaker families who are related to the Haynes family.
Right. How did you stumble into this amazing site and story, Joe?
There was an elderly couple, Ruth and Art Mraz, and they were historians, and they worked on this history. And Ruth Mraz wrote down everything. She interviewed a lot of people from the Haynes family, and she wrote everything down, that all this oral history. They recorded it. They did like a phenomenal amount of work on that. They worked on restoring the church along with the Historical Society over in Fort Fairfield. And in 2013, before that, when I was a young child, I remember watching the news and seeing the Mrazes on television talking about Tomlinson Lake and the Fringe Church and that connection with the Underground Railroad. And I've always been interested in history. So I remembered that because I live right here, and I fish this brook, and I've been to the lake, thousands of times. So when they were talking about Tomlinson Lake, it kind of caught my attention. Many years later, I had the idea of providing walking tours and possibly a trail where folks can come and visit and learn about that untold history. And in 2013, I contacted Art Mraz. His wife, Ruth, had already passed away. And I explained to Art what I was interested in doing. And I visited him several times that summer. He pretty much, handed everything over that he and his wife had worked on. And I just picked it up and took it from there. And in 2013, which is our first hiking event, Art actually came. He was like 80, I think he was like 88 or 89 years old, and he came to the very first Hike to Freedom.
That's amazing. So you have a big event every fall.
So every fall we have our annual event. It's usually the first weekend of October. It's the Tomlinson Lake Hike to Freedom.
Great. And how many people come to experience this site?
Well, last year, due to COVID, we downsized a lot of the aspects of the hiking event were omitted due to close contact, and so we only had a couple hundred people. But in 2019, we had over 1,000 hikers come that weekend.
Wow, amazing! Yeah. And the trail's open. Is it year
round?
Yeah,
so we have a lot of people that ask about coming and hiking the trail on their own, and we leave up all the trail placards. The signs are all left up, and people are welcome to come anytime they like it. And it starts at 250 Glenburn Road, and it's about 2.9 kilometers to the lake.
Great. So let's see what's happening here behind you.
Yeah, sure. So over here we have a squatter's cabin, and this is a part of that story that that's kind of came about by being asked a question. That's where did the black families go once they came to New Brunswick? The answer to that question is a lot of them became squatters because they want to be left alone. Like they were just escaping persecution in the state of Maine or in the United States. They didn't want to be caught by bounty hunters. So once they made it to New Brunswick, a lot of times they would just go out into the woods and build a small squatter's cabin, and that's where they lived until slavery was abolished in the United States. We know of two different sites. There was a squatter's cabin that was built in Upper Kent New Brunswick. There was one built in Jacksontown, New Brunswick, and there was another one built in Wilmot, New Brunswick. So just right here, handy between Perth, Andover, and Woodstock, we know about 3 different sites where black families came to New Brunswick and built a squatter's cabin. So a squatter's cabin wouldn't have been that elaborate or fancy. It's pretty much just some smaller logs notched and stacked together, and they wouldn't have had money, or they wouldn't have had a lot of tools or supplies. So a lot of their building was basically made from mostly materials that they would have found in the woods. So that's why you can see here between the cracks, we have that chinked with moss that we just gathered here from the forest floor. So this squatter's cabin, for hikers that come here, once we're finished building it, it's basically just going to be a cabin for interpretation purposes. So if you come inside, it's probably dark in here, Natalie.
I think I'm doing well.
Yeah, so if you come inside, we have a couple of banners here that talks about the Underground Railroad. This one over here, which was provided by Deborah Coleman, talks about conductors and the agents in the Lord's Secret Service.
I'm seeing some famous
there's
names
some
here. Harriet Tubman.
Yeah. William Still.
Susan B. Anthony.
Yeah. John Brown down there at the bottom. And here behind you, or to your right, we have some Quaker history. So we learn about the Quaker movement. Because basically the Quakers played an important role in the Underground Railroad, because it was a part of their religious belief that to enslave another person was a sin. And then over here behind you, we have another storyboard that tells the story of different New Brunswickers who enlisted in the Civil War. So there's 6 different people that we talk about on this storyboard here. We have Private William Snow, who was from Woodstock. We have the Pepper brothers, who were from southern New Brunswick. The Butterfield brothers, who were born in Bath. And then probably one of the most famous Civil War heroes of all time is Sarah Emma Emmons, who's actually a woman from Macadavic Lake.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Joe, you and I went to school here in New Brunswick, and we've talked about the fact that we really didn't learn this any of New Brunswick Black history or Indigenous history, for that matter. And it's I hope that's a trend that's going to reverse very soon.
Well, one can only hope. So we have a couple more storyboards out here.
Mm-hmm. I'll follow you up.
I'll give you the lowdown on those. So we're basically back to why the Underground Railroad came to Canada. If we had northern states that had already abolished slavery, why would they come further north to Canada? It's because of this Compromise Bill of 1850. So before 1850, it was illegal for bounty hunters to come to northern states that had abolished slavery to hunt, capture, and return a person who was seeking refuge. So the southern states and the northern states, there was a lot of turmoil happening, and they foresaw a civil war happening. So they wanted to prevent that civil war from happening as much as possible. I mean, because no country wants to go to war with itself. So in 1850, there was we have the Compromise Bill that changed a lot of laws to give easement to the South, and one of those laws was the Fugitive Slave Law. So it basically added new teeth to the already existing Fugitive Slave Law, and that now allowed bounty hunters to come to northern states after 1850. A bounty hunter could now come to the state of Maine if he knew where someone was, a black family was seeking refuge, and he could capture, hunt, capture, and return that black family to wherever they escaped from for quite a handsome reward. And it became quite a lucrative business. So after 1850, a lot of people who had been, living as a free person for many years was now in danger again. So that meant they had to pick their stuff back up and go further north to Canada. And so down here, I think this is our last storyboard, Natalie. This storyboard pretty much talks about codes and quilt patterns, which is probably one of the things that people find the most interesting. So we all know that the Underground Railroad, the conductors and people on the Underground Railroad use certain signals to help runaways, stay safe, and they did so by putting quilts out that had different symbols, and each symbol had its own meaning. And so, like for instance, this one up here is Drunkard's Path. So if we find Drunkard's Path down here, it was a warning signal to take a zigzag route to elude pursuing slave hunters and their hounds. Up here we have a bear paws pattern, and if we look down here for bear paws, we see that it means to follow a mountain trail out of view and then follow an actual bear's trail, which would lead to water and food. So along the trail here, we're basically following old animal trails all the way to the lake. And that's why when you see down here one of our trail placards, is of a bear paws pattern.
Okay.
Yeah, because that's what we're doing today. We're following animal trails, like old animal paths, all the way to the lake. Yeah. So we saw a moose the other day. Yeah, we were up here working. So they're around.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So let's stop the video here.
Sure.
Hi, my name's Graham Nickerson. I'm a Black Loyalist descendant and a Black historian. And I'm standing beside a pit house. And this would have been constructed by Black Loyalists in 1783 when the Black Loyalists emigrated here with the British. And this site is located on the trail to represent the Black communities that were already in existence by the time that fugitive slaves arrived in the Maritimes. So most of the fugitive slaves, if they came by sea or if they came over land, they would have from here migrated downriver to places like Florenceville, Queensbury, Fredericton, St. John, and integrated into the other Black communities that they found along the way. And in some cases took on leadership roles or became prominent people in the community.
So tell us a bit about this structure, Graham.
So this is a recreation of a pit house. There are a couple that we've built or that have been built elsewhere, one in King's Landing, and of course the original reconstruction in Birchtown. And so this would have represented a early semi-temporary, or it was intended to be a temporary shelter. And so it's actually, I've just recently run across evidence that the door would have actually been in the roof and not in the front. And one of the things we need to, it's pretty important today, is because of climate change, in 1783, in the late 1700s, it was much colder and there was a lot more snow. And so it doesn't really make a lot of practical sense to have a low door like this because you would have had to dug yourself out.
Mm-hmm. So what would the reception have been like in this part of the country for Black Loyalists arriving here?
Well, one of the reasons why we are researching Black Loyalist history is because it's not a simple answer. That's not a simple question, and there's not a simple answer. We have in the 13 colonies, it's a complex number of different societies that all send people up to Nova Scotia, or they're sent up to Nova Scotia, and they all have different ideas about religion, things like slavery, the place of blacks, emancipation, and class. And so it's hard to say exactly. We know how some people took it. There was a lot of animosity and uncertainty because of all of these free blacks, which the whites of the time wouldn't have been used to having to deal with, this sort of like people who aren't enslaved, or the large numbers of them. And the second thing is that there weren't really within the Black Loyalist community. There were a number of different groups. There were free blacks, there were black veterans, there were enslaved people, there were bondsmen, and they came from all over the 13 colonies. So they also had a cultural aspect. Some of them were very African, some of them were African American, and some were in between. So it's a big, tumultuous mix of cultures altogether.
So Black Loyalists arriving here. So then later on, with the Black Americans arriving via the Underground Railroad, were they making those connections with existing settlements?
There's plenty of evidence to show in New Brunswick where fugitive slaves were coming in, either through St. John, down through St. Andrews, in through Nova Scotia, and sort of popping up here and there. But one thing that was an issue is that they were still technically enslaved people and could be returned back to their previous enslavers.
Right.
So there isn't a lot of overt evidence of this stuff because they kept to themselves. And in general, the black community did keep to itself. If you see, sort of the old thinking is that, oh, those poor black people were shunted off to these remote locations, but there's evidence of blacks wanting to be away because they knew what proximity to white people meant.
Right.
Constant surveillance and coercion. So keeping to yourself, keeping under the radar, meant that you weren't making a target of yourself.
Right. And did many blacks stay in New Brunswick? My sense from growing up here is that there's a much higher population in Nova Scotia than here in New Brunswick?
Yes, so there are a couple of factors. First, there's the 1792 exodus to Sierra Leone. That's about a third of the Black Loyalists leave after it becomes fairly clear that they're not going to change the enslavement culture here anytime soon. And they weren't getting their land, and the government had cut off the rations to loyalist settlers. So most really of the middle class, upper class blacks left and went to Sierra Leone. And in New Brunswick, there was a smaller proportion of blacks who came here in the first place, but with the proximity to Maine, it was easy for them to go overland and head down through Maine and into Massachusetts and in New York. So in the late 1800s, the financial climate in the U.S. was so much better, and in states like Massachusetts, they were actually much more liberal towards blacks there than they were here. Mm-hmm. And so there's essentially a mass exodus again.
I'm going to just pan back a bit to show this scene and bring Joe G back into the conversation. So I would be interested in hearing a bit about how the two of you connected and the role that you see this site having in raising awareness and educating people about Black history in New Brunswick.
Graham came to the very first hike to freedom in 2013. And then we just worked together ever since, pretty much.
Yeah, I heard it on the radio. I heard an interview for Joe, and I said I felt kind of compelled as a black person that I should probably go. I might be the only black person there, and
he
this
was
is important. And I was. Well, and my kids.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and as to the significance of it all,
this trail,
and site?
Well, it's important. I consider it an historical site or a heritage site. It was pretty much a gateway to Canada for a lot of black families who were running for their lives. So,
Yeah.
And not to mention, it's a beautiful area. We got the brook. We got we're walking through the foothills of the Appalachian Mountain Range, and it's well received by a lot of people. A lot of people that when they come through talk about how they find it important as well. That we both get comments all the time that the work that we're doing is great, and to keep doing it. So.
It's, I think, even more timely right now, over the last year that we've been through and the prominence of the Black Lives Matter movement. So just interested to hear from you your thoughts about how a site like this can be a gateway to conversations and education and better understanding between people.
Well, I think literally this particular site is a gateway. You can start from this location and drive down the river valley into Nova Scotia and back around to St. John and up again and go from site to site and see Black history. And for most people, who look like me, it's only been recently that you can go and see your history or history of people who look like you reflected in mainstream coverage. And so in terms of social activism and Black Lives Matter, we are, Black people that is, reasserting ourselves as settlers, as original settlers, and with the good and the bad. And I think we play an important role in the narrative because we are settlers. We are guilty of the same kinds of crimes that were committed against First Nations and land appropriation and all those things as everybody else is. But we're also on the oppressed side, and so we have a different perspective that's, I think, important to the conversation.
Back to your question, you said something about being able to see different sites. What makes this special is that you're not just seeing it, but when you're out on the trail and you're actually hiking it, and you're, reading the storyboards, walking into the squatter's cabin, walking into the pit house, you're doing more than seeing it, you're experiencing it. So a lot of people are able to, a lot of different people have different learning styles, and I find that a lot of people retain this type of information that we teach if they associate that with a personal experience that they're having at the time. So.
Great, thank you both so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So hi, I'm Jesus Perley. I'm from the Tobic Reservation, and I was supposed to be here a lot earlier, but I'm a little late today. But I was going to make a basket and stuff like that, but what'd you say? What's the connection between Maliseet and Willistic people and these Black people escaping slavery from the United States was when they came into Canada. One of the places they felt safest was on the Tobic Reserve, or other reserves, other native communities. Like, I don't know if they went to the other ones, but I know they came to our reserve in particular, and there was documentation of their names and who they were and stuff. But back in the 80s, there was the priest from the church on our reserve took their documentation and stored it at the band office, and that band office burnt down. I found this out from a woman named Marina Moulton when I told her about there was Black people buried in our graveyard, and everybody was pretty shocked to hear that, because I don't think too many people really knew about that on our reserve. So we were all really interested to hear about it, and we wanted to know more about it. And so that's, ever since then I've been kind of interested in the whole thing, you know. And so yeah, I was just going to come up here and participate and be making a basket, because, like, well, they must have seen all that back then. They must have seen you know, birch bark canoes being built, baskets being made. And well, this border here was, you know, we didn't really pay much attention to the border at that time, because, you know, we have our tribe extends between both Canada and the United States, and we have the Jay Treaty, and so that allowed us to move back and forth freely, because our territory, like I said before, spans between both countries. So yeah, I found it quite interesting. It was a part of history I wasn't really too familiar with.
Right.
And I'm glad that Joe here is shedding some light on it, because I think that the true history is more interesting than the made-up one. And even though it might not be as pretty as people may like it to be, I think more people would be interested in history to hear the true story, you know. And
Right.
you know, like the recent Canada Day, you know, like I don't think they should have canceled Canada Day, because, like, the kids just want to go out and have burgers and stuff like that. But maybe celebrate, like, what we've become and what we're going to become, and educate what was wrong in the past. And next time, maybe just let the kids have fun and have their Canada Day. And like my grandfather, he was a World War II veteran, and he fought in the D-Day invasion. And you know, so when I see the Canadian flag lowered, I don't like that, you know what I mean? And I think social media, people are on their phones too much, and they get manipulated too much. I think they should think things through first before lowering a flag and stuff like that,
Right.
you know?
It's a really complicated time, and I think over the last while we're much more aware as Canadians, as we need to be, about Indigenous history and Black history. And so it's amazing to be here on this site where those two stories really come together.
Well, you know, lies make things very complicated. The truth is easy and simple to understand, and you know, when people lie, you know, they just confuse everybody.
Yes.
And so maybe once the truth and reconciliation, you know, comes out, maybe it'll be easier to, or not easier, but just, it'll be just better that way, you know, if people just told the truth about the past and what happened, instead of hiding it away. And that would be something to be proud of, you know what I mean? Because who's proud of lying, right? Nobody. You know what I mean?
Jesus, thank you so much. I'm so sorry we missed your basket making. We'll have to come back again.
Yeah, I'll be here. I make baskets here all the time anyway, so it's no big deal.
Great. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Yeah, because Joe's got he's got a couple baskets down there that just need to put a rim on them and stuff, and maybe we can send you down with that.
So I should know this, but what's a fiddlehead basket? What size would that be?
Right over there, Joe's got one there.
You want me to bring it down? You can show her.
Yeah,
I'll go grab it.
this weaver's real thick, and geez, you brought some thick weaver there, student there.
Yeah, I've discussed that with him.
So it's hard to, like, I usually use this real thick weaver for bigger baskets, but that's my excuse. Because it's hard to weave. Like, these weavers are almost looks like they're almost thicker than these standards, and as a rule, your standards, which are these things, should be thicker than your weaver.
What's the wood? What kind of wood are you using?
Black ash.
For both the standards and the weaver?
Yeah, it's the same wood. It's just, see, I just showed Al there. You take one of these, and you can split it in two, and it's shiny on the inside.
Okay.
See? Yeah. So get this going here.
This one's a bit rough, you know, but
Pretty good to me.
Likewise.
so and then you just weave the weaver. Yeah. Just making just a rough one, you know.
Who taught you to weave?
My father, Larry Purley, he about passed away. He's still alive, but he had a surgery. He almost died, and I never wanted to make baskets because it's too frustrating, eh? Like the some of the parts, but once you learn how to do it, it's enjoyable. And so eventually I said, well, okay, I'm going to learn how to do it. And well, I don't regret it now because I end up making quite a few baskets. And yeah, this weaver's thick, but I think maybe when it dries out, I'll be able to pull it down.
Is the bottom woven too?
Well, no, it's like that.
Oh yeah.
See, and so the squares you want to make sure they're not too big, so the fish and fiddleheads or whatever you're going to use it for doesn't fall out.
The fish you catch will fall for these.
I know. That's why I put birch bark on the bottom of mine. So I only go minnow fishing. But Joe, geez, I don't know how he does it, but he's the master at catching them brook trout. I know that.
Tell me about your Fiddlehead Basket, Joe.
Well, this is a square bottom, and it's got small squares. That's, you know, small enough the heads of the fiddleheads aren't going to fall through, but big enough that it's going to allow paper and other foreign material to drop down through. And Jesus pretty much built this one. I kind of helped. It was like a learning, one of those practice ones. But he built a two-handled one on it, so that way it's more stable, and it doesn't
Right.
swing as much as a regular one. It's the biggest one. I've seen fiddlehead baskets before that were probably like half that size.
I'll go on that.
So this is a big.
enough for a fish or two in there.
This is a big basket. Like if you filled that full of fiddleheads, that'd probably be
Yes,
like
yeah.
30-40 pounds.
So you'd
so-
pick into that basket and then
Yeah,
wash them in the river
Yeah,
in the same basket.
yeah, you could. Yeah. Of course, the fewer the fiddleheads, the easier it is to clean. Like if that was clear full, that would
Yes,
be
yeah.
a hard to clean them all like that. But you could fill it probably half full and then just dunk it back and forth into your brook or your river and get them good and clean.
And you're passing this skill on to other people, teaching others?
Yes, because I just want to keep that information around. And, some people, I just don't mind teaching whoever, I guess, is how I'll word that. And a few years ago, I had a friend who had a butcher shop, and I used to help him cut meat. And so we were cutting up a moose, and instead of using like the saws and stuff, he showed me how to debone it with a knife, how to cut the muscles out, and how to chop up the tough stuff in the stew meat and the tender stuff in the steaks. And so, but the thing was, he was French from Grand Falls, and his grandparents years ago was taught by somebody from Tobic. So like it just shows how some people might think it's wrong to teach somebody something about your culture, but what if that disappears? It disappeared for me, and somehow I ran into somebody who was non-native that taught it back to me, that was taught by natives before. So that I don't see no harm in it,
Right.
because as long as you keep the information alive, what does it matter if who carries that information, you know? Because if it's gone, it's gone. And so that's why I don't mind showing non-native or black or whatever. Like, this is Canada, right? We're all supposed to, like, you know, just look at what we used to do. And how can you not teach somebody and share something by actually doing it in front of them, you know? Like, people are pretty smart. They watch you. They see how it's done. They can do it too. And, you know, like, the more people that know how to do it, the more people who are going to value the black ash tree.
Yes.
And the more, like, people won't just cut them down if they're in their way. Oh, I want to make a lawn over there or something, you know? And so they'll be more conscious of the value of the tree. Because out of one 8-foot log, you know, you could probably make a dozen of these baskets. And so that tree's probably worth, you know, $1,200, you know, or more. Who knows how much it's worth, you know? Some people can make a little tiny basket. The fancy basket makers, they make these little artistic baskets, which a little tiny, like, I know a person who would have, with this amount of ash, could have probably made like $1,000 basket. You know what I mean? It would have been about this big. And but see how thick these weavers are here? The fancy basket makers, they split those again, and then instead of just being shiny on one side, they're shiny on both sides. So they're really shine, eh? And they make these little tiny baskets with all these patterns on them. And the more experienced you are and the better you are, the more you're allowed to sort of charge for it, because you're good at it, like. But yeah, so another person could have probably made, you know, 10 times. Like, if I sold this, let's say, for $100, if it had a lid and everything, you know, they could have made $1,000 out of the same amount, you know. So that's the levels of basketry that you can go, eh? And but I was just never patient enough to sit there and make one of those little baskets, you know. I'm always making fishing baskets or fiddlehead baskets or pack baskets and
Baskets for work.
yeah, for work. Yeah,
Yes, yeah.
potato baskets.
But then what you're talking about is decorative baskets that people like put their sewing supplies in and candy and
Or just they just
whatever
put it up
else.
there
Yeah.
to look at because of how it looks.
A work of art, yes.
Yes.
So how will you finish off the fish basket? Is it like the one I see over here? Will it become narrower at the top?
Well, what I'm going to do here is it's as high as I'm going to go with it. And it's a little rough because I didn't have like my, I usually use tin snips and I have some gauges too. And I just had my crooked knife today, you know. So I managed to make that with just a crooked knife, so that ain't too bad. And so what we're going to do is you got to let that dry overnight, because like say in a few hours, like overnight inside your house, you'll have a bunch of these spaces. It'll start to dry out, and so then before you can put a rim on there, you got to pull all these, start from the bottom and pull them all down like this here. And you can't really do that when it's wet, so you pull them all down, and that'll, all them little open spaces you see will close up.
Right.
And then, but then when you're done, you take one on the inside and you fold it down like this. And usually I have scissors, and you cut it like that there, so it tucks underneath there and you can't see it. And then this one you just cut, every second one you tuck in. But the one on the, like this one's on the inside, so you fold it over the outside, and then you just cut this one here, it's on the outside, and then you tuck this one, and then cut this one, tuck this one, cut that one, all the way around until you get it. And this one here, it's a little bit uneven, so after I pull it all down, I take a strip and I shape it from thick to thin, and I go around and I make it so that it's level before I put my rim on there, so it's not all like this or like this. It's
Like mine.
nice and level. So I gotta wait for that to dry till tomorrow, so I could finish it now, say if it was an emergency. You know, there's no ash police that are gonna come out and say, you know, hey, you skipped a step, buddy, you know.
Great. Oh, well, thank you so much.
Yep.
March. By file left. March. Company, by file left. March. Oh, not all the way around. Nope. Now you go that way. Okay. By mistake. Keep going, there you go. By file left. March. Squad, halt. Front. Order, on. In place, rest. Company, load in 9 times. Load. Okay, go to the load position. Charge. Handle cartridge. Tear cartridge. Bring it right up to the muzzle. Charge cartridge. Yeah. That's fine. Draw rammer. Halfway out, and then the second half, and bring it right up on a slight angle. There you go. Ram cartridge.
I looked at a couple different places and
Just wait. Bring it back down.
it's just a matter of finding that book
Return rammer. Halfway out, and
at all.
then the rest of the way.
I went up and I looked for a paper can, and I didn't see it up there. But I
Prime.
just a receipt. But I didn't do it. Check a couple places. It is fun. Oh,
Shoulder. Arms. Squad. Ready. Aim. Fire. Shoulder. Arms. Load. Quickly. Company. Ready. Left oblique.
They did it one time.
There you go. No, just the body.
It was a joke.
Aim.
Next week, go for your flowers at noon.
Fire. Shoulder. Arm.
I used my receipt to get the tax back on the box.
Order. Arm.
And I got audited.
In place. Rest. Okay, and there's no prescribed. You can stand however you want. You can talk. You can drink water when you're in place rest.
regulations. He said, anything you buy associated with the farm
Sounds pretty good.
has to be
Is it friends with
associated with the
Flintlock?
farm.
Yeah, it's a little different to reload.